Good evening, everyone. Calling to order the regular meeting of Sonoma's Planning Commission, and we'll do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Nugent,
Here.
Commissioner O'Neill, here. Commissioner Willers,
Here.
Vice Chair Domback,
Here.
Commissioner WIRICK,
Here.
and Chair Barnett.
Present. Thank you.
Thank you.
And are there any suggested changes to the agenda? If not, then I would hear a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner WIRICK,
Yes.
Vice Chair Domback,
Yes.
Chair Barnett.
Aye.
The motion passes 6-0-2.
Thank you. Mr. Viviani. Haven't seen you in ages. How would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? May I do that? Yeah. United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, now is the opportunity for comments from the public. These would be comments on any item that is not on the agenda. Items on the agenda, of course, will be open to public comment as we take them up. Does anyone in the audience have a comment on a topic not on the agenda that they would like to make? No? Natalie, do we have anyone on Zoom who would like to do that?
We don't do public comment on Zoom anymore, so no.
Oh, okay. That makes life simple. Then we will move on to the consent calendar, which tonight consists of approval of the minutes from the meeting of January 18th. Any commentary or changes proposed in the minutes? Okay. Excuse me a second while I restart my beloved iPad. Oh my God. I'll sign in a minute. Okay, I would like to hear a motion for approval of the consent calendar, please.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner WIRICK,
Yes.
Vice Chair Domback,
Yes.
Chair Barnett.
Aye.
The motion passes 6-0-2.
Thank you very much. All right. Both my iPad is now rebooted, and we're going to move into our regular public hearing agenda. Item 4.1 has been withdrawn, so we will not be having that item. So the next item up for consideration is item 4.2, approving potentially a wine tasting and use permit at 412 First Street East and 414 First Street East. And at this point, I would ask for the staff report.
Absolutely. Happy Thursday, everyone. I hear someone coming. The project before us is a wine tasting use permit, design review, and sign permit. There are two addresses. One is 412 First Street East, and one is 414 First Street East Suite. The address is the Sonoma Wine Shop, and the second address is accessed via El Paseo and is currently razzle dazzle. So this is a somewhat of a exciting and boring project. This is the wine bar going to a wine tasting use permit. So the location is the Sonoma Wine Shop, which has been used for wine tasting since 1976. In September 2017, they obtained a use permit to operate a wine bar and tap room under a Type 42 ABC license. For those of you who have been involved with our wine tasting ordinance, we have different definitions for a wine bar and a wine tasting use permit. A wine tasting facility and a wine bar. A wine bar is an establishment like licensed under an ABC Type 42 license. This is devoted for the sampling and sale of wine produced by one or multiple wineries for consumption on or off site. Food may be served with some provisions. However, the establishment is not a restaurant. A wine tasting facility is under an ABC Type 2 license, and this is for wine and related products and enables customers to taste wine on behalf of a single winery. And so if you think of Enoteca or Sai, those are wine bars, where Pangloss is a wine tasting facility. So similar requirements for food, must be pre-prepared and can be sold on site. So a wine tasting use permit is required for both wine tasting facilities and wine bars. This project site is already a wine bar, however, it is a legal non-conforming wine tasting facility. And legal non-conforming wine tasting bars and facilities can be continued, but they can't be enlarged. And there also can be no increase or relocation of the tables in either the front or the back. And so that's the reason for the application this evening. As I mentioned earlier, we have two addresses, 412 First Street East, which is about 1,000 square feet, and is the current Sonoma Wine Shop. It fronts the Sonoma Plaza. And 414 First Street East Suite C is about 392 square feet and is currently retail and accessed via El Paseo. So the total square footage is about 1,400 square feet and is located in the Pinelli building, which is historic. So the proposed project is a wine tasting use permit to convert the existing Type 42 to an O2, as well as to expand into 414 First Street East Suite C. We have the proposed hours of operation from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily. However, the conditions of approval reflect the kind of blanket conditions in the wine tasting use permit. There is proposed sidewalk seating on First Street East, as well as some limited outdoor seating in El Paseo, up to 8 seats. They would be required to obtain a sidewalk seating permit annually. There are two other components. We have design review and a sign permit for a new canopy, exterior paint, and signage. And just to note that another component of the project, which is for retail sales and deli, do not require a use permit from the Planning Commission. Those fall under grocery store and retail, provided they're not prepared on site. So here is an overview of the canopy. It will be clad with wood materials that are painted or stained. There's an enclosed soffit with a wood slat design overlaid with a metal lattice detail and 4 LED downlights. The illumination would be from dusk to approximately 10 p.m. and they would be 4-inch recessed LED lights. The signage would be on the front and the sides of the canopy. That would say Capo Isetta in gold halo letters on the front. That would be 8 inches tall and 6 feet 8 inches wide. The end caps would be non-illuminated and would be 4 inches tall and 23 inches wide. There are also 2 window signs that are approximately 30 inches round in gold finish on the left and right windows. And the exterior paint to the facade and the canopy would be slate blue. Here's the details of the canopy. There's a daytime and nighttime. As everyone is probably aware, our wine tasting use permits are regulated in our special use section, 1950-120. Overall, the intention is to limit the concentration of wine tasting facilities in the Plaza Retail Overlay District. As I mentioned before, this is actually one of the 25 already, so it's listed as one of the legal non-conforming uses. So approving this permit tonight is not going to increase that number. There are standards for the use and standard conditions of approval. Some of those being ABC license and health department compliance, hours of operation, and then no expansion without a wine tasting use permit amendment. The wine tasting ordinance does state that no outdoor seating is permitted unless specifically allowed in the wine tasting use permit. So that's one of the key components with the project tonight, is to find that the sidewalk seating and some limited seating in El Paseo would go along with this wine tasting use permit. I believe I mentioned already, so there'd be proposed 2 tables for 2 people each on First Street East and up to 8 seats in El Paseo. As a condition of approval, they would need to maintain an annual sidewalk seating permit and meet all the standards in their 6 feet of clearance, insurance for the city, ABC compliance. In order to approve the project this evening, the Planning Commission needs to make the findings of approval for a wine tasting use permit, for design review, as well as for a sign permit. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution approving a wine tasting use permit, design review, and sign permit for a wine tasting facility at 412 and 414 First Street East, Suite C, subject to findings and conditions of approval. Concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Christina, correct me, I'm confused a little on the operating hours, because I thought they were asking for a 9 a.m. start, but the ABC starts at 11?
They have asked, we ask that applicants prepare a narrative, and so they said that their stated conditions of approval are, what is in the conditions of approval is the basic conditions for a wine tasting facility that's in the code. And so there's different hours for private functions. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but the hours for private functions are 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. and public hours are 7 to 10.
Oh, okay, so in theory, they could do something privately until 11. Okay, got it, thanks.
Did I miss that they want to open before 11?
Yes.
Then maybe we want to amend the condition of approval to allow them to open earlier. Good catch.
Any other questions? Yes, Donna?
Hi, Christine. I have a couple of questions. Just for clarification, I'm trying to understand, is the proposed deli at 414 connected to the wine tasting room?
I will let the applicant speak to that.
Okay. And then the second question was around the LED lights. And are there any requirements in terms of limiting lumens for that with regard to light noise?
To light noise, and we don't have anything for light noise about color, and our code has requirements for color and intensity, and for conditions to have it turned off at night.
And so I didn't see those anywhere in the signage. I'm just wondering if those should be added, or
if what should be added?
the code for the light intensity and.
What they've proposed complies.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions?
Just a question. Is the Sonoma Wine Shop in business now?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
It is. And also the street numbers that are currently on the big white street numbers, will those be modified?
That is an excellent question. I don't believe those went through any kind of review, so we're happy to look into that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Okay, and the only question I've got, pardon my failing memory or ignorance, are the other wine tasting facilities around the plaza, do they also have tables on the sidewalk? Do any of them have tables on the sidewalk?
A lot of them would like to, and historically have been allowed to. We will be following up with a code cleanup with the sidewalk seating provision, which currently limits sidewalk seating permits to restaurants. However, for example, in the next project that is coming before you, there is a use permit and it does allow sidewalk seating. So it's a little bit patchwork. The ABC does have requirements for it being kind of cordoned off and stanchions, and our director's been working on that issue to have a uniformed approach.
Okay, and when you say it has been allowed, under what conditions has it been allowed previously?
It has really, so we have to remember this is a new-ish requirement. So prior to 2018, they were allowed by right. They didn't require a use permit. So some wine tasting facilities have use permits. Some existed just sort of by right and had sidewalk seating. Some of the use permits have sidewalk seating allowed. Some of them don't.
Okay, and so just for my further clarification, as we try to address the inconsistencies both in the history and going forward, would it be the city's intention to grandfather and legalize the uses Jennifer's shaking her head.
I am shaking my head because we are, sidewalk permits were always supposed to be an annual permit. COVID happened, things changed, everything loosened up, even the ABC laws loosened. So we will be coming back again with a clearer process around sidewalk dining, drinking, sitting, any use of our sidewalks, and the rules that will govern that, including making sure that they're putting the stanchions up for ABC compliance, making sure that we have our 5 feet setback, and so it will still be an annual permit. So nobody gets grandfathered in. Everybody has been notified through the chamber, and there's others that will be personally notified that they will need to come in. My goal is to have something to you all actually next month. So then in May it goes to council, so we'll be ready for this season.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify, so right now the wine tasting use permit ordinance prohibits the sidewalk seating unless it's allowed. So if we said no now, then they would have to come back through the process in order to allow it later on.
I understand. One more?
Jennifer, a follow-up to that comment about the use of sidewalks, and this will be for that topic, but aren't we an open carry city and people can have it all over the plaza, have alcohol all over the plaza, and generally anywhere in town? So don't know why we would have barricades up around seating, because people can walk anywhere in Sonoma.
requires it.
It's an
But
ABC
what
requirement.
about
We
the
actually,
plaza?
well, the plaza is different. The plaza has its own permit for the plaza. But again, it's sun up to sundown. So it's not 24/7.
Okay.
So there are limitations even with our open allowances in the plaza itself. But businesses with their Type 42 license, they are supposed to, or even a Type 2, they're supposed to submit where they'll be serving alcohol on their premise, and as well as within our sidewalks.
Okay, so farmer's market coming up, soon as the sun goes down, boom.
No, they have their own permit. So they get an ABC permit as well for the
Okay.
farmer's market and things like that. What we're talking about when we say, you're allowed is you can go right now before sunset in the park and drink in the plaza, right? And have your food and everything at one of our tables in the plaza. That's what that allowance is for.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, is the applicant here with us tonight? Sir, did you have anything you wanted to come up and say to the commission? Please introduce yourself and
Mom, you want to come up? Bill Isetta, and I'm here with my son Dominic and my wife, who is right here, Marilyn, and obviously joining our team is Mr. David Viviani, formerly of the famous Sonoma Cheese Factory. First of all, we want to thank all of you for the amount of time you put into anybody's, request for approval. Christina, I'm happy that you were able to explain all of these various permits, because I'm still constantly going to Dominic, go, exactly what are we, right? But we are seeking approval for a wine tasting use permit, and we look forward to, and hopefully your approval. We've been in this community for about 50 years, and even prior to that, our family goes way back in the wine business. My dad and my wife Marilyn's dad were with Christian Brothers Wines and Brandies for a number of years. Her father was actually the treasurer and controller for 35 years. So we grew up with the famous brother Timothy. My nonna was a cooper. Nonna and my dad opened a winery after he left the brothers in the late 40s, early 50s. Old Pioneer Wine Company in San Francisco, and then they went into the Italian wine and grocery deli type of business. But we're just proud to be members of this community for so long. We've tried to be really good stewards, and you're going to find that if you approve this, You're going to find out how we're involved in this community. We'll be good stewards for the community as appropriate in terms of our wine room. Don, did you want to add anything?
No. Yeah, thank you, Christina, again, for all your help through this process. I heard your question about the deli. I wouldn't call it a deli. What we're trying to accomplish, we call it an Italian marketplace, a bodega, sometimes it's called. So we want to feature local olive oils, pastas, etc., that we can kind of retail as something that people can bring into the plaza and have, either some charcuterie or some bread from a local bakery. So I wouldn't call it a deli by any means. It's not Sonoma Market by any means, or even the cheese factory at this current state. So yeah, we're just trying to have something a little bit extra, generate some extra revenue, and kind of feature Sonoma, and it's all its bright stars.
I've got a couple questions for you. So this is going to be one integrated space. It's not, even though it's two addresses, it's going to be one space.
Yeah, ideally, wine tasting in the front, and then you got a retail / kind of private tasting in the back. So,
Okay. And pardon my, I'm not sure if it's ignorance or naivete. I'm noticing on your signage you don't use the word wine at all. Perhaps it's the nature of the illumination in the mock-ups of the front of the building, but even though it has been historically a wine shop for very long,
sure.
I'm wondering why it is that you're not mentioning the word wine. Just curious.
I maybe just an oversight, to be honest with you. Yeah, we could easily add that. We have our design.
Well, perhaps just on the windows or something.
Yeah.
I just, it's not, particularly if someone's, for example, across the street.
Sure.
Depending upon how much illumination is in the interior, it won't necessarily be immediately obvious what the nature of this business is. And so my thought was that some hint
Sure.
might improve the situation. Any other questions? Donna?
Thank you for the explanation. I just had a follow-up. I'm just trying to understand the relationship of the marketplace to the tasting room. So will they be contiguous, or are they separated?
Well, naturally, right now you have a separation in walls, so we would have to figure out how to either make an entryway, or it's easily you can go out the back and then in through a separate entrance.
So the idea would be that you may have two access points, one from El Paseo and one from the frontage wine tasting room?
Yeah, bearing costs, obviously.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else with questions for the applicant? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and, if appropriate, approval. Who'd like to start?
Mr. Chair, I believe I have to disclose for the record that I've had conversations, I believe on 2 occasions with the applicant regarding general, overarching themes about their intent to submit their application.
I appreciate your disclosure. As the law now requires. Well, we won't call it a law, as the policy now requires. Anyone else? No? No discussions? Okay, if there's no go ahead.
So, my only concern with this application is the fact that it's got 2 addresses, and that we're assigning a use permit to 2 addresses for wine tasting, and under one wine tasting use permit, and so I don't know how we get that issue solved in this case. I understand the business, I get it, I just find it difficult that there's a use permit traveling with two separate addresses for wine tasting when we have a limitation to one permit. That is the front building. So, I don't know if there's a condition of approval that can be subject to this parcel only being under a single use permit.
We can, so I understand that in most cases it runs, with the land, right, or with the address. So we can make a condition of approval that it is for one business for both addresses being used, right? So it's just one business though, so that if they do sell and separate in the future, we're not with two wine stores. So we can add a condition of approval to that effect.
That's good. The only other issue that comes to mind now is the original kind of context of limiting the number of wine tasting use permit to 25 was to reduce the number of storefronts around the plaza that were being occupied by wine tasting facilities or wine bars. If this is a model, then a single wine tasting permit can expand into under that one use permit. And so it's in essence defeating the intent of the original ordinance by the reduction of the license number, in my opinion, because that's what it was set up. It has nothing to do with this permit particularly. It's just that this permit brings up those issues, and so that's my concern in relationship to approving this, is that it has those tangential potentials, and that is a winery that currently has a use permit can find another storefront and operate out of that second address under that use permit, because that's essentially what we're approving here. So, it's a sticky one here. It's just a sticky one. So, anyway, those are my comments.
Maybe there's a way as well in the conditions of approval specifying that this is a contiguous use of a single business of two spaces that are attached. In other words, it's going to be incumbent on the applicant to actually create egress through the front store into the rear space, so it essentially becomes, in a de facto way, one address and one space, and therefore it would limit, perhaps, well, it would limit perhaps the opportunity for someone else to operate contiguous spaces that were not fully accessible and had egress through one entrance. So
I think my concern was just, there's nothing in the ordinance that prohibits the expansion of a wine tasting facility. There's a process outlined in there. That's what we're doing right now. So I think I understand the concerns. I just think that maybe we need to look at the ordinance and look at how to improve that.
Yeah, just to follow on, that was where my line of questioning was going to go, and I was trying to understand if it was contiguous or if it was separated, because there are these two buildings, and understanding the permit. So I would appreciate if we could just make sure things are very clear so that we don't set up ambiguity in the future.
Yeah, I would just add that it feels like the 25 was an appropriate number. I do not get calls on a very regular basis. We're not turning people away. There seems to be a fairly natural kind of coming and going that's happening at the plaza right now.
okay, anything else? Anything further? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I will make a motion.
Excuse me. Before we do that, we should do public comment.
And do we have any on?
Not on Zoom, but maybe in here.
Yeah. Do we have any public comment besides that of the applicant?
Neil Caldwell, well-designed premium signage. We are the designer on the project for the facade and signage improvements. This comments that I have to add, though, are in light of the address numbers that are featured on El Paseo Court Shops. I have background on the knowledge from doing prior work at the property. The donut shop that's located back there had to get a building permit. When they submitted the building permit, the permit is routed through fire. Fire Marshal Trevor Smith, in determining the code, said that the property was under addressed for the fire code. So those signs that are in place, 412, 414, gigantic, we basically got called by the property owner and said, can you help me out with these addresses? And I said, these requirements can't be right. We went through it all. The fire department said, yes, this is what we want to see there. We produced it, installed it. Everybody agrees that it looks terrible and is out of scale with the plaza. So if there's a way that we can all work together to gang up on the fire department, I am all for it. So that's the close of my comments. But if there's an opportunity to modify the addressing as part of this approval, then I would certainly be up for it. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Okay, I'm ready for a motion. Oh,
Hey, good evening, Commissioner.
I'm just ready to move on, you know.
Sorry, Larry. I just wanted to add a few words just in support of the project. I'm here for the next agenda item, but the Isettas are a great family. Obviously, it's a generational legacy play. It's a great wine, and they only do things one way. So anyway, I just wanted to express my support. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, now I'm ready to entertain a motion.
No, I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve the wine tasting use permit for 412 First Street East and 414 First Street East, as well as the design review as presented. I don't think there needs to be additional wine or words put on. I think it's a business. They should be able to do their business. That's it.
With additional,
Oh, with additional language that,
You said no changes.
well, the changes that we spoke about.
And the increased hours,
Which ones?
the beginning
that-
hours.
So, okay, as per A, B, C, you mean the 8 to...
For the, for
Okay,
the
as
narrative.
per the code. How about that? As per our development code.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I will second that motion.
Okay. Any further discussion before we take a vote? I'll just say that my suggestion of the word wine was purely suggestive. I wasn't implying it was conditional. Okay,
I just want to say I look forward to what you come up with.
let's have the vote first. All right, roll call, please.
Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Enthusiastically, yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner WIRICK,
Absolutely, yes.
Vice Chair Domback,
Yes.
and Chair Barnett.
Aye.
The motion passes 6-0-2.
Thank you. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. All right, next item is in a similar vein. Item 4.3, wine tasting use permit at 481 First Street West. And we'll go to the staff report.
Thank you. Yeah, this is kind of a similar instance, a little bit different. The parcel is 2,614 square feet, is located on the west side of the plaza. There's an existing historic commercial building divided into two spaces. The southern space is retail. The northern is a tasting room and has been for quite a while. Most recently, it was the Rancho Maria Winery. The building was constructed in 1890 and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The winery use has been on site since 2011. It was originally Adobe Creek, followed up by Rancho Maria Wines. When it was originally initiated, there was no use permit required for the tasting room. The use permit and the exception were to allow access through the rear of the property and for a parking exception. There was approved outdoor seating, but it was limited to 9 seats. And in the use permit, there is sidewalk seating allowed through a sidewalk seating permit. Well, we currently have a new business going in. Moon Hollow is requesting a wine tasting use permit, design review, and sign permit. And the purpose of requesting a wine tasting use permit at this time is to take advantage of the flexibility and the standards in our wine tasting use permit ordinance. It would also authorize additional outdoor seating and they propose to maintain the same hours of operation, but there's that additional flexibility for the private events and other things in the ordinance. The proposed outdoor seating is to have 4 club chairs, 9 round tabletops with 4 chairs, and 1 fixed table with 6 chairs, as well as ADA seating on First Street West. Proposed are 3 round tables with 2 chairs each. Being a historic building, in order to get an ADA ramp, it was going to be pretty prohibitive, if not impossible. And so the building official has been working with the applicants for quite some time to come up with this solution. The design review changes are exterior paint and a backlit wall sign that has Moon Hollow on the front facade. There's also a hanging sign that would be under the awning. I will just note it doesn't say Moon Hollow Wines, it just says Moon Hollow. Panglass says Panglass. Here's the front elevation. Similar to before, this would not increase the number of tasting rooms in the downtown. It's just taking a legal, non-conforming, and that operates under a use permit and converting it to a wine tasting use permit. And same conditions, ABC and health department, event limitations, no expansion without a wine tasting use permit amendment. And here is a shot of the front where the ADA seating would be. So we'll be authorizing the ADA seating in the front and then additional seating in the back. And similar to before, we have our wine tasting use permit findings of approval, design review findings of approval, and sign permit. And staff's recommendation is to adopt a resolution approving a wine tasting use permit, design review, and sign permit for a wine tasting facility at 481 First Street West, subject to findings and conditions of approval. That concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you. A question for you. Do I understand your description correctly that the retail space on the southern side of this 2-space building is going to remain as it is?
Correct.
Is that large leather that's in there?
That's my, yes.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? No? Okay. And the applicant is here. If you've got some comments you'd like to make,
Hello, Commission.
give your name again, please.
George Bevan, 190 West Napa Street. Thanks to staff for the support and building department regarding the outdoor seating, our ADA specialist, and it's a historic building, so we want to obviously be careful with this one, and I feel that the pin-mounted lettering is pretty understated. It's not mounted on a plaque. We weren't real heavy-handed with it leaves the building intact and the sign to be the sign and the building to be the building. Colors to update the look. What else? That's about it. And then staff did a great job. It's an existing use permit. So actually, I think Christina, it's under the updated use permit, the allowable, I guess the new wine tasting, or maybe some of that versus the as it was originally approved or something like that. Anyway, it's outlined by staff, and I'm available for questions. So,
Any questions? I do have a question for staff when we return to the commission. Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, Christina, this appears, unless I'm mistaken, to be a fairly dramatic increase in the number of seats
In the back.
in the back. And are those accepted from parking requirements?
Yes, there's no parking standards for wine tasting use permits and outdoor seating as well.
Okay, I just want to mention, and I'm not going to make it a sticking point here, but my observation is that the wine tasting facilities are increasingly adding seating. I mean, to the point that it's substantial in some of them. And I'm wondering on what basis we have decided that there's no corresponding parking number associated with it when we've applied on a rational basis. I'm simply trying to be rational here. Seats are seats, whether they're indoor or outdoor. We're talking about an increased load on, and how far are we going to let this go? I mean, this is, I think, a jump from a current 9 seats it was, or 6, up to my count of 26 at least, not including the ones out front. And yet we're not triggering anything at all on this.
Yeah, the parking requirement's a square footage basis, so it's the same as retail. So with our last parking, I don't think this changed in the last parking code, but it's just part of the shift from counting seats. And because we weren't doing any regulation it's really fire code that is going to be regulating the number of seats.
No, I understand, although, the dynamics of use between a retail space and the number of people who are in it, and the dynamics of use of outdoor seating area and the number of seats is, to me, categorically different. And one of them has implications for rapid turnover. I mean, if you go into a Raldi's to buy a shirt, you go into a Raldi's, you buy your shirt and you leave. If you go to a wine tasting facility, you sit down and you drink, and you're there for an hour or two. And if you've driven, even if you've driven to O'Raldy, you buy your shirt and you leave. If you've driven to the wine tasting room, you're going to be there a long time. And so I'm just wondering whether we ought to reinitiate another examination of these specifications, because I think they're categorically different uses.
I think Commissioner Willers might have something to say.
I hope that if they're wine tasting, they're not driving.
We just modified this section of the code.
Yes.
And we, as a group, basically agreed to the standards that we set for outdoor seating, which I think, agreed that we wouldn't apply a parking load to it, that we thought it was a positive in terms of the plaza and its commerce. How are you going to I'll ask a sideline question. How are you going to enforce the seating at the back of this building during its times of operation if it's limited to 2 seats when it has the ability to have 20 seats in it?
I understand your questions, and I understand the complication. And as I said, I didn't raise this as an objection to this application. I'm merely raising it as an observation that the seating component that's at least visible to me in these facilities is increasing dramatically. And I don't have answers to your question, but I do think it's worth perhaps talking about, if only to determine, and once again, this is a difficult calculation, to determine as best we can what the load and the dynamics are of this activity on the plaza in a aggregate sense, and determine whether or not we need to consider some different approach to it. I mean, some of these places on First Street West going past Spain Street have gotten quite an increase in seating.
Can I make a suggestion that we hold this conversation to the parking ad hoc discussion that we have in a little bit on our agenda?
Sure. Thank you. Okay, that was my question. Anybody else have anything else they'd like to bring up? No? We've heard from the applicant. Do we have anyone on? We don't have any Zoom. Do we have any more public comment? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chair. I would make a motion to adopt a resolution approving the wine tasting use permit, design review, and sign permit represented in item 4.3, subject to the findings and conditions of approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner WIRICK,
Yes.
Vice Chair Dominic,
Yes.
and Chair Barnett.
Aye.
The motion passes 602.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your attendance. All right, now we're on to item 4.4, which is a discussion of appeals, notice of appeals, processing of appeals, and so forth. And we're ready for the staff report.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this pretty short and sweet. A couple years ago, a year ago, we had made an amendment to our appeal clause in April 2022, and the intent behind that was to address to add clarity to what happens when City Hall is closed. And so the change at the time was to go from calendar days or just days to business days, to clarify that if City Hall was closed, that that didn't count towards the appeal period. It created another inconsistency. If you've ever gone into the Sonoma Municipal Code and searched for appeal, there's probably 25 sections where there are different appeal clauses. The primary one and the authority for appeals is in Chapter 124. And while we clarified language in Title 19 in the zoning ordinance, we didn't touch 124. And so since the ordinance was adopted in 2022, there's just been some inconsistency in our appeal process. And the goal tonight is to correct that inconsistency and improve clarity for everyone. And then we will bring that through all of the sections of the code. There's another ordinance that will address sections of the code that are not under the responsibility of the Planning Commission, which will be going straight to City Council. And so the proposed change is to have it be 10 calendar days and to add a provision that states that the deadline to file a notice of appeal extends to the next business day when the 10th calendar day falls on a day when City Hall is closed to the public. And staff's recommendation is to adopt a resolution forwarding a recommendation of approval to City Council to introduce the ordinance.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions for staff? I have one. Do we consider Fridays as a closed City Hall day?
Under the appeals, yes.
Yes. Do we need to further clarify that? It's not an official holiday. It's an elective choice on the part of the city to close City Hall on Fridays. It's not, recognized on a general calendar. Do we need to make note that this includes days when City Hall is closed, or is this complete enough as it is?
So the city attorney did add that last portion of that sentence where it says to the public, because we're open, but we're closed to the public. And so that was his recommendation for the Fridays that in which we are open by appointment only.
Okay, I'm just wondering whether or not the members of the public will understand that, and in finding themselves showing up at City Hall on a Friday, wonder what the heck they're supposed to do and who they can get in touch with, so they don't have a weekend of anxiety ahead of them.
They can we can answer the door if somebody knocks on the door, but we can put it in the actual application, the appeal application that has to be submitted, a little bit more clarifying language in regards to our hours of operation, because they may change and we don't necessarily want to go back and change the ordinance to reflect that.
That sounds great. Thank you. Yes, Donna.
I have a naive question. If I'm assuming this means that this is a piece of paper being carried into the. If we ever go to fully electronic, what are the implications there? So it wouldn't be closed to the public, but it just wouldn't be processed. So do you find any concern?
Right now, we're not proposing to modify the process, and it's still the same process of bringing a form into City Hall and paying the fee there.
Anyone else? Okay, those are questions. We don't have anyone in the audience, so we don't have any public comment. So let's just bring it back to the commission for discussion and potential approval.
Seems clear enough to me. I don't think we're substantively changing anything. I think we're just making the process easier for city staff and working around the environment that we're in with being closed to business hour or being closed to the public on Friday generally. So I would be in support.
Okay, anyone else? Would you like to make that a motion, Matt?
Sure, why not? I would like to make a motion to recommend to the city council the adoption of an ordinance amending section 1.24.020 and all the other sections enumerated in section or in agenda item 4.4.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Who won? Donna. We'll give it to Donna. Okay. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Nugent,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner WIRICK,
Yes.
Vice Chair Dominic,
Yes.
and Chair Barnett.
Aye.
The motion passes 602.
Thank you very much. All right. Now we have a special presentation by the Sonoma County about the Sonoma County Active Transportation Plan. And I believe we're doing this online.
You may start your presentation now.
All right, thank you. Good evening. I'm going to share my screen. I believe I can do that. Okay. Well, good evening, commissioners. Thank you for having me. My name, excuse me, is Erin Ferguson, and I work for a consulting firm called Fair and Peers. We are working with city staff as well as Sonoma County Transportation Authority to lead the countywide active transportation plan update. We presented to you back in October with kind of a first milestone update on what we were doing and where we were at. I'm back this evening to provide a second update in terms of our planning progress, highlight some guiding principles, talk about our vision and goals, and present to you the draft local projects for the city of Sonoma, as well as draft local priorities for those projects and potential topics for policies that would be included in your active transportation plan. And then I'll highlight next steps. Let's see here. There we go. So a reminder, the city's active transportation plan is being put together as part of this countywide effort. So it'll include a look across Sonoma County regionally, and then a number of, in addition to the city of Sonoma, a number of other cities and unincorporated county are also updating their active transportation plans as part of this effort. So the previous generation of the plan was called the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan. This is, as an industry, we evolved to now kind of speaking about those modes more broadly as active transportation to try to be inclusive and recognize that there are also those who move around outside of vehicles but might use mobility assisted devices and things of that nature. So a slightly broader terminology to be more inclusive of different kinds of active modes. But the plan development is organized into a few different tasks as noted here. Kind of where we're at now is really in the task force of developing those draft projects and policies and programs. And so we're starting to now get into the phase where we'll be sharing out those draft projects with the broader community, starting with you all this evening, and then getting subsequently taking steps further into the actual plan documentation and so forth. So purpose of this plan update, one key focus is identifying improvements to existing streets that really support people of all ages and abilities being able to walk, bike, or roll to their destinations. So to give people more kind of options for travel modes beyond personal vehicles. So looking for ways to both substantively improve safety as well as improve the comfort for people walking and biking or rolling. So that's one key focus. Another focus here is the regional connection. So the real benefit of doing the countywide active transportation plan in a coordinated fashion is to also be considering connections from the city to unincorporated county and then across the county as well. So that's the regional component of it. And then implementation, so wanting to make sure we're identifying projects and prioritizing projects and identifying supportive policies to help pave the way for implementation of these improvements. Snapshot of our current schedule. So we're approaching the end of March, which is that yellow dashed vertical line there in the stars. As I mentioned, we're kind of in the midst of our proposed projects and programs task, as well as some of that funding and implementation considerations, and that's where the draft priorities come into play. So really, at this point, moving forward, what we'll be focused on is gathering community input on kind of the draft materials that we have, and then over the summer begin to actually put together the draft plans themselves for city review and then ultimately for public review come the fall. This past fall, we had our round one engagement, and so it was a combination of advisory committee meetings in each of the jurisdictions. I mentioned we presented back in October an initial milestone update. We also had kind of pop-up events across the county where community members could provide input, as well as online web map. So you can see the screenshot here showing various comments collected from community members, and then as well as an online survey and some coordination with local community-based organizations as well. So a variety of ways in which that initial input was collected to help inform the draft projects that we have now. And then starting in roughly April, May, and June, we'll be going back out to the community to gather more input, this time specifically on the draft projects and priorities. So a few guiding principles I wanted to touch on. I think we mentioned these previously, but just wanted to emphasize SCTA and agencies across the county have committed to Vision Zero. And so part of this active transportation plan effort is making sure that we're aligning projects, policies, and programs with that Vision Zero action plan and goal of eliminating traffic fatalities and serious injuries on public roads. So that is one of those key pieces. As I mentioned a moment ago, the all ages and abilities. And so this is really recognizing that people, depending upon their own personal level of comfort, different things make those individuals kind of comfortable, maybe getting on a bike or in some cases even walking. And so we have used analysis tools. One that we presented on back in October was a level of traffic stress analysis, where we look at characteristics of the roadway like traffic volumes, the speed of cars traveling along the roadway, and then the level or amount of separation that people biking or people walking have from moving traffic. And so we want to be creating an active transportation network and creating really a street network that is both substantively safe for people walking and biking and rolling, but also that feels comfortable and is enticing to walk and bike and desirable to walk and bike along. And so there's really a few fundamental different ways we can do that. One way is making changes to our streets to provide more separation between people walking and biking from moving vehicles. And then another kind of core fundamental way is to make changes to the streets that slow vehicle speeds down. And so as we talk about the draft projects, those are kind of two of the kind of basic levers that we have to think about in creating an all ages and abilities network. Another key piece is making sure we're incorporating industry best practices. Since the last bicycle and pedestrian master plan was developed as an industry, we've gotten a lot better at improving conditions for people walking and biking. And so making sure we're using those industry best practices and highlighting those opportunities, both in terms of the projects, but also as we begin to identify, opportunities to update or enhance policies that are supportive of those projects and improvements. So another reminder here, these are the different kinds of bicycle facilities that we often talk about. There's kind of the maybe bike lane that I think many of us are familiar with, where it's simply kind of marked space with a white line that kind of separates bikes from moving vehicles. As an industry, we've gotten better at designing and thinking about how we can create facilities that have more separation from moving vehicles, both off-street things like the shared use path or a multi-use path, but as well as on-street types of changes where we have things like a separated bike lane where there's actual some physical elements, physical vertical elements that help protect people who are biking from cars that are moving. So using these different kinds of considerations, and particularly those lower stress facilities as part of our network enhancements. And then similarly, thinking about pedestrian improvements. So in addition to making sure we have sidewalks where we need sidewalks and that connectivity for paths, also thinking about how do we improve crossings for people walking and biking to help make those more comfortable, easier for people of all ages and abilities, and safer. Since we last gave you an update in October, we have our vision statement that's been refined a bit further. So the vision statement that we're working from is here on the slide. I can read it aloud here. Our guiding principles are to improve safety, connectivity, equity, and quality of life. Walking, biking, and rolling shall be safe and appealing modes for people of all ages and abilities to use for everyday transportation and recreation. And then our updated goals and those descriptions of the goals, we have connect and reliable, deliver a continuous active transportation network that links daily activities and housing, and that allows people of all ages and abilities to use a variety of transportation types easily, affordably, and dependably. Safe and well-maintained, create and sustain a high-quality and low-stress active transportation network, employ Vision Zero and safety plan policies and strategies to advance this goal. And the third, community-oriented and place-based. So tailor projects to the surrounding community context and user profiles, support a diversity of uses and users, and create community through active transportation programs and policies that prioritize walking, biking, and rolling. As we kind of transition here into the draft projects, just kind of baseline existing bikeway network for the city of Sonoma. is what we're showing on this slide. As part of the agenda packet, we provided some kind of full page standalone maps that hopefully are help improve legibility of what we're showing here. But we've got different colors on the map to indicate the type of facilities. So that kind of blue colored, teal blue colored being multi-use path, the yellow being bike lane, and then the orange being kind of the bike route, as being the three primary types of facilities shown on the existing, or as part of the existing bikeway network in the city. From the work that we've done to date, these are the proposed new projects. So for the bike facilities and for crossing improvements. So the crossing improvements are the orange circles outlined in black. And then again, the kind of different colored lines and those associated numbers that you see over them align with certain bike facility improvements or recommendations. And so in the agenda packet with the maps, there's a table provided kind of that gives a little bit more, should give a little more description of, for a given line on the map, what the associated project is. But some of the...
May I ask a quick question while we're on here?
Sure, yeah.
Good evening. I'm having a little trouble seeing if any of these markings of the map correspond to a bike boulevard versus a bike route.
Yeah, so I'll call out maybe some examples, or I'll try and point. So with my cursor, you can let me know if that comes up. So like,
yeah,
Project 7 here is highlighting a bike boulevard as an example. Same with Project 8 and 13. Those would all be bike boulevards.
And a bike boulevard is defined how?
Yeah, great question. So bike boulevard, and I think I might go back here. I went quickly through this slide, but I think this is might be helpful. So a bike route is often something where we are either putting up a sign for a bike that says bike route, or maybe sometimes these pavement markings that are often referred to as sharrows can be used to designate a bike route, but then very little else is done to the street. So often bike routes can be used to just as a kind of wayfinding in some instances, or to try to legitimize that people on bikes can in fact, share the lane and ride on that street. But in some instances, it's not a particularly comfortable place to ride. It can still be higher stress. So it doesn't just putting down those pavement markings or the sign doesn't do much to slow vehicle traffic or create a more comfortable biking environment. So a bike boulevard is more like this type of environment where you have some sort of traffic calming treatments like speed humps or neighborhood traffic circles, or in this example here, they've painted some edge lines on the roadway. These are all things that kind of help calm and slow and manage vehicle speed to try to create a more comfortable and safer environment for people biking, where we don't have enough, roadway width to say provide completely separate space for people biking. So it's a way to lower speeds.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So current industry practice is, if we want to add kind of a bike facility to a street, but we don't have the physical space to create, a bike lane that's a separate space from the vehicle lane, then we look for ways to slow those vehicle speeds, so it can be a safe and comfortable environment for people biking. So that's why you see a number of those orange lines outlined with the thinner black line as bike boulevard type projects. Also a number of crossing enhancements for the existing multi-use trail that passes through the city, and some of those other improvements to try to enhance existing streets and existing facilities.
May I ask a question too? Yeah, I really wasn't, I don't really fully understand what the crossing enhancements look like. Those circles you have.
In terms of what those might include?
Yeah.
Is that your question? Yeah, so those kind of varies depending upon the nature of the street, but it can include things like upgrading the pavement markings. So I think some of the pavement markings at a few of the existing crossings are kind of a different type or I'll say of a different type than what kind of current industry practice is, to try and make sure that they're visible. It can also include enhanced signage so that it's more for drivers, more obvious that they're approaching and can see that there's a crossing. It can include advanced kind of yield markings, which are actually the little triangles on the pavement where we try to indicate for people driving cars, we want you to slow down and yield here so that they're not encroaching on the actual marked crosswalk. It can include a raised crosswalk, so where the crosswalk itself is elevated a few inches, and so cars have to slow down to be able to go over the crosswalk. And it can include flashing beacons. Most of these crossings are already kind of smaller residential streets, so I don't think so. The kind of treatments would be, matched to align with the existing context. Usually, things like the flashing beacons or things that are a little bit more involved tend to be saved for where you have multiple vehicle lanes that somebody needs to cross. But it would be things of that nature, kind of for any of these crossings, scaled to match the number of vehicle lanes on the street that's being crossed, as well as things like the speed and things of that nature.
Thank you.
I've just got one other, actually, as a comment, because I do a lot of walking every day in town. Particularly, I've noticed that, and if you look in the lower right-hand portion of this map, you see Denmark Street marked. You've got a proposed bike boulevard going along what I assume is 7th Street East, and it terminates at Denmark. I'm noting that Denmark Street is now getting an increasing amount of use by bicyclists who are then going through the pathways through the high school playing fields. And actually, there's a way to get all the way out to Broadway. And there's actually a bike shop on Broadway renting bikes that are sending people down through the streets that connect to Denmark Street. So I would just simply suggest that when you look at your perhaps proposed bikeways, that going and demarking Denmark Street and the attendant routes connected to it through the high school playing fields and out to Broadway, which basically wind their way through Nathanson Creek Trail and then into connect with Nathanson Creek Park, where there are bridges over the creeks. There's a whole route people are taking to get to 7th Street East. Already they're using it. I mean, it's become a common route that I'm seeing for people.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that observation. All right.
Please continue.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll keep going, keep jumping in. We have here on this slide, and again, there's should be a full page figure in the agenda. This map is showing proposed sidewalk projects. So this is where there are sidewalk gaps that have been identified, and all the little numbers. We're just keeping track of them all. And so this is also kind of in addition to identifying the bike facilities and crossing improvements for people walking and biking. These are identified to help think about how best to build out the kind of sidewalk or walking network within the city.
Question on that, real quick. Hi, Aaron. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. What was the process by which the sidewalk gaps were identified?
So these sidewalk gaps were identified through the city's general plan update. And so we actually received this information from city staff and then have mapped it and incorporated it into this active transportation plan.
Is there a preferred method if a commissioner or a member of the public has identified additional sidewalk gaps to present that information or pass that along to you?
If I think probably best to route it through city staff, but just to the extent that it's like the street name and this street between A Street and B Street, that type of information is good.
Great, thank you.
And also if it's one side or both sides.
Okay.
Thank you. Good addition.
I have a question. This might be somewhat off topic, but historically there's been a developer in this community that has wanted to do a route on 8th Street East, going through, connecting and getting into the Springs. Is that at all incorporated in here?
When you say a route,
I've heard about this plan to have a bike route connecting 8th Street East, somehow going through town. I don't know if it's going up through 7th, and then I think somewhere along here it looks like you connect to Level Valley Road. But it was a plan to get or maybe it's on Highway 12, but to connect a bike route to Highway 12 in the Springs.
If you go to your next slide, I think, there you go. So the 8th Street East, Sonoma County Parks is already going after the railroad right-of-way along 8th Street East and have applied for grants. And so you'll see it goes up 8th Street East, and then there is a section that goes across Napa Road, potentially to 7th, and then goes up to Lovell Valley that then connects with our multi-use trail that then connects to 12 in the Springs. So yes, so the idea is to be able to not have to go through the city, but to kind of wrap it with a bike trail.
And again, what's the status of that?
So Sonoma County Parks has going after the grants right now for the 8th Street access. Because there needs more space.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now since we went to this next slide, I'll explain what it is. So this is where we're looking at the existing network with the proposed projects. So you have to look closely at the line work. The existing is a slightly thinner line, and the proposed enhancements or new projects show up as the slightly thicker lines. But kind of stepping back and looking at this, you can start to see kind of the looking at kind of existing with proposed north-south connectivity and then some east to west connectivity along with the crossing improvements. And so again, we still have the sidewalk gaps on the previous slide. It's hard to add those to this map. So this is kind of the combination of more the bikeway improvements and crossing improvements with the different kinds of facility types being shown by the different colors.
Probably the worst street with the worst gaps in safety is Napa Street, as it essentially moves from the city into the county, particularly because of this, our sidewalks up to what I think technically might be called 6th Street, and then it terminates, and there's no shoulder, there's no, there's nothing in the right of way that one could. I walk there, and so you just basically walk through the weeds on the opposite direction of traffic. That's probably what I see on here as the biggest gap in a proposed solution, is we need to be able to give alternate transportation, both walking and biking, on Napa Street going east through the county, which is at roughly 6th Street, and hopefully making its way all the way to 8th Street, and whatever you have on there is connecting to it.
If you go up to the sidewalk one again,
Yep. Oops. Wrong way.
there you go. So there is where I think you're talking about on Napa Street. You'll see 5th Street East and then all the way. So those are all sidewalk gap identification. I think that's the area you're talking about.
It is.
I'd like to take the time, since we're getting into a little bit of details, to make a comment as well around, it was the item number 22, where it's a crossing at 5th and Studley. And I see that bump outs are described there for traffic calming. I just want to say 5th Street has become a major alternate street through the city versus Broadway. And that 5th Street Studley crossing is still very dangerous. The city had a CIP for a study across there, and I don't really understand the coordination of that study that was being proposed by the city and this. And specifically, I think bump outs are not enough. You probably need an on-demand stoplight because elderly people cross that and people just don't see it, and there's a lot more traffic. So I just want to add that comment to that item number 22. And again, looking at Jennifer, I don't know what the status of the capital improvement project was. It was talked about last year.
I'm not sure what the status is of that aspect of it specifically, but so what the ATP gets integrated within our circulation element, which then obviously, as we've talked about, is, with our general plan kind of sets our priorities and funding. I would have to ask Mike Berger, our Public Works Director, what the status is on some of these studies, but that's part of why they're still highlighted here, is that we don't want to lose sight of these needs. And so Mike Berger and I did meet with this team already to make sure a lot of the things that we are already looking at gets incorporated at this point as well.
Thank you.
All right. A few more slides and then kind of available for more questions. So a part of the plan's development, in addition to identifying these projects, is also to support implementation, prioritizing the project. So what we're showing here are the various criteria that we're using to prioritize the project. So the first here that we've got listed is safety, and looking at really using existing safety plans done locally and SCTA's Vision Zero High Injury Network. So projects that overlap with those locations and providing improvements essentially receive a point as part of the prioritization process. Equity, so considering there's a few different measures for equity at the federal, state, as well as regional level. And so considering equity as part of this. And so projects that are making enhancements in kind of areas of the community that have been identified as kind of disadvantaged from a transportation perspective would get a point. Looking at proximity to existing transit, existing and future transit or bus stops. And so being able to kind of help make those sidewalk gap closures or bike improvements in proximity to those. Also looking at proximity to schools, again, for kind of improving that connection to be able to walk or bike to schools. And then regionally, part of that regional coordination. So SCTA, as part of this update, is identifying regional routes across Sonoma County. And so projects within, within the city that kind of connect or overlap with those regional routes identified by SCTA would have an extra point, as well as those that fall within the broader Metropolitan Transportation Commission's Regional Active Transportation Network would also receive a point. And then those projects that are providing those lower stress improvements and enhancements, so where we are kind of more significantly enhancing safety or comfort, thinking about wide range of users, those also are receiving a point. And so these kind of projects receive points and are ranked relative to one another within a given jurisdiction. So for the city of Sonoma, kind of the projects that we're talking about are ranked using these criteria relative to one another. Following our spring engagement, our upcoming engagement, projects that receive strong support from the community will also receive extra point, just to take into consideration where there's strong community support. So the outcome of that is that each kind of project has a score, and then based on those scores, we group projects into 3 tiers, a tier 1 being high priority, 2 medium, and 3 lower priority. And so we have shared, and what I have here in the slides are kind of the draft priorities in terms of which projects are falling into that tier 1 grouping. So based off of what we were looking at on the map, so the same project ID numbers are being used, but you can get a sense of, in this case, for the bike facilities, what's falling in that higher tier priority. So I'll pause here for a moment, and then the next slide will show from kind of similar tier 1, but more related to the sidewalk projects.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, what happens to a tier 3 project? Does it just not happen? Obviously tier 1's a high priority. You're going to put all the funding around tier 1, but what is the outcome of tier 2 and tier 3?
Yeah, I think so. Great question. So yeah, we have to have some level of priority to try to direct implementation. I think tier 2 and tier 3 priority projects, the fact that they're in the plan still means that, given the right kind of mix of opportunities, the city could still pursue funding for them. So a lot of this, we think about kind of grant funding as one example or one potential source for funding to help implement. And for a lot of grant funds, kind of the basic point of entry is like, did you name it in a plan? So the tier 2 and tier 3 projects are still kind of part of what's planned and what's hopeful. So they're still included in that mix of kind of what could be eligible. There might be other things that come to fruition that make a tier 2 or tier 3 project all of a sudden a higher priority. Could be a redevelopment project on the land use side. It could be that it becomes possible to group a lower priority project with a higher priority project that happens to be geographically close in proximity, for example. Or it might be something where there's another kind of nexus that comes up on it, and you can be a little bit more opportunistic. But I think in trying to give some direction as to like where do we kind of initially place emphasis, or what might be kind of the most competitive things that we could put forward for funding. That's kind of really the purpose behind trying to sort things into some buckets of priorities.
Thank you. And my second question is maybe also for Jennifer. It's project number 7. And it's really, my question is around changing the parking from angled to parallel. Is that is that on both sides of the street? And secondly, how does that really figure into the whole plaza plan?
So this would be a suggestion. If we wanted to do a class 3 bike boulevard, which requires additional space, then that's what would be required to do that. If that's not desired, we would still be doing an installation of a bike improvement, whatever would fit in that space. I think I'd have to look exactly if this is just for that continuation of a bike boulevard, and that's why we are suggesting that at this time. But it doesn't need to stay that way. If there's recommendations that we don't want to install the greater size ones.
Well, I guess the question becomes, how do you, this is one piece of a larger puzzle. And I don't even know where we are with the plaza initiative. And so, if you say yes to this and people think, oh, it's a great idea, it kind of impacts whatever that plaza plan is. And since we haven't even discussed that really, I'm just bringing it up. It seems like it's a reasonable, it's an open idea, but it seems like it's kind of even before there's ever been discussion about the whole idea about the plaza. I just wanted to bring that up as a comment.
And to just clarify that, so Spain Street from 5th Street West to 2nd Street East, where there's angled parking, is that not the plaza?
It is the plaza.
It's only the plaza.
It's only that little strip. And
Yeah.
it's not to say that we would actually do it to all that length, because it may be just in that little block that doesn't make sense for us to continue the boulevard, and that it just becomes a sharrow at that time. The plaza master plan is still a priority. It hasn't been started or anything, and that would shape this, and this could be changed accordingly. These aren't set in stone. I always look at ATP project lists as like, here's our goals, but then we have reality, and that's called money and actual implementation and CIP project lists and things like that. And so these do get modified on the type of bike lanes. We actually get in some cases, we go in and we actually do the measurements, and we see where, let's say, stormwater drains are, or sewer covers, or things like that. That impacts things. So once you actually get into the actual measurements and doing the groundwork, a lot of times these things do modify. I think the goal is the better class always, but the reality sometimes means that we end up with maybe a sharrow.
Thank you.
And I have a comment in relationship to 7 and what I see to be, I just lost it here. Basically, the connection of 7th Street to the bike path, to the existing bike path that goes through town. And, Spain Street is a high volume street. As a cyclist, it's a street that I ride all the time to go up 7th Street or up to 5th Street West and up 5th Street West up the highway. But it's a high volume street, and it's not necessarily what I would call, quote unquote, a safe bike space because of its volume, where the bike path just north of it is a safe bike path, and for those who feel less safe, for them to ride. And so a concentration on that access into our community, in other words, the bike path to 7th Street, because the bike path crosses all of the north-south streets that would take you to the same places that Spain Street crosses, where you don't need to, in my opinion, you don't need to create a class 3 bike space on Spain Street. The dollars would be better used from a safety standpoint to improve the implementation of crossing our community at the already dedicated bike space that crosses 3/4 of the community, and further that connection to 8th Street East for those who want a safe bike only place. Spain Street's just a very high volume space, and 5th Street West is the same way. You get from one car place to another, where we don't have the ability to make things wider in our community. 7th Street East, north-south, is a very narrow rural road. Doesn't have has ditches, culverts as its sides. It's probably 24 feet wide at the most. So improving that as a bike boulevard is a great goal, but there's so much improvement that has to be made there to do that. That's questionable in and of itself. And so, in my mind, it would be better to focus on what our existing infrastructure is, where the safest elements of that existing infrastructure for both the cycling and the walking community, and implement projects that can be brought forward quickly and focus those dollars on making that the most connected route through the community. And then, we're lucky. We have a grid. Everything can filter south from that main bike corridor using 2nd Street East, 1st Street West, 1st Street East. The bike path crosses all of those, and it brings you down into the same place that Spain Street brings you to 2nd Street West, the plaza. But you don't have to interface with a car for those who don't want to. And and if we're trying to bring kids down into the center of town safely, that's the safest place to do it, is the bike lane, not Spain Street, and not 5th Street West for that matter. Because the Spain Street, 5th Street West intersection is always a confusing element, because there's basically 2 lanes of traffic at each intersection trying to figure out which way everyone's going to go and who's going to do it. And so, you can make it safe and a very nice bike boulevard between that intersection and 2nd Street West, but when you get to that intersection, it's essential chaos, basically. And unless you feel very comfortable on a bike, sidewalks are there. Unless you feel very comfortable on a bike, it's not a place that you want to ride. And it's very much like Napa Street, for that matter. I will not ride Highway 12 into town along Napa Street because it is not a safe environment. And I'm an accomplished cyclist, and it is not a safe environment to ride in. So I just don't. I don't ride there. And I'd rather ride Highway 12 up Valley than Napa Street in our community. So anyway, those are my comments.
I want to concur with Bill on the nature of Spain Street West. Spain Street East of the plaza is much less traveled, but west, I lived there for 13 years, and it's only gotten worse. And I don't think it's at all a safe street for bicyclists. I don't think it's any safer than Napa Street, for that matter. So I would agree with Bill that making improvements there would create a false sense of confidence in people. So I'm definitely not in favor of that. As I say, the I've already identified the section of Napa Street that needs to be improved with some kind of sidewalks or frontage. And I had a question on something on here, which was, excuse me while I re-find it. Was it Napa Road? Wasn't there a Napa Road? Yeah, there, number 14. I'm a little unclear as to what this is indicating. Napa Road from Highway 12 to city limits to the west. So, well, it's Leveroni on the other side. So this is a bike lane that starts on Napa Road and goes to Highway 12.
Actually, go to the one that has the existing and proposed. So it's connecting the bike lane that already exists on Napa Road on the east side and extending it around into the county, and then at the county line. And then it looks like it's recommending a corridor study to see about Leveroni Road. Is that correct, Aaron?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I was just to double check our numbering scheme that might need to be updated, but yeah, that's correct.
Well, there's a sidewalk on Leveroni, but it's also an extremely fast traveling cars on Leveroni. And as a pedestrian, crossing Leveroni anywhere but the corner is like crazy. I'm not familiar with a current bike path that's on Leveroni. Did you just make reference to that?
No, there's no bike path on Leveroni. It's on Napa Road.
And where's the bike path on Napa Road?
It's just a path. It's just a designated route.
But
I think.
I walk that route frequently when I walk to Friedman Brothers. I'm not familiar with a bike route at all on Napa Road. Are you, Bill?
No, it's just the roadway.
Just the roadway, yeah. And
Yeah, I think so. This is the kind of existing facilities, if that helps clarify kind of what's out there or what we have that's out there today.
well, that's not accurate. There is no bike lane on Napa Road.
There's no thing painted on the.
No, there's nothing.
Okay.
It's just a roadway with some area that's got a white line that gives you a little bit of shoulder, but only in some sections. In other sections of the road, you're in the grass.
So Napa Road does have a white line that indicates a shoulder,
Yes, but that's it.
which is where you ride, which is where I ride.
Okay.
It's not designated as a bike lane. It doesn't have any other markings as a bike lane.
There's a sign that says share the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That is technically a designated bike way. So
Bye, Donna. Thank you for your input.
So that is a designated. It's not necessarily very clear, but it is a route, which is why it's on the plan. And it's just right now being proposed to extend to hit the trail. So
Yeah.
that's the idea behind this one right now.
Um,
I think we have a couple more slides.
Yep, I'll keep going. So kind of similar on the priorities. This is showing the tier 1 sidewalk and crossing projects. So for a number of these are the sidewalk gap closures we had talked about, but then as well as some of the enhanced crossing locations as well. So in addition to the projects, I mentioned this briefly at the beginning, we're also identifying policies to help support active transportation and implementation. And so these policies will be organized in the plan in support of the three goals that I mentioned. And so here showing some example topics that are likely to be addressed as part of the policies. Our next step is to actually kind of put together in written word some draft policies for city staff review, but wanted to share an update in terms of the types of things, types of topics being considered on the policy front. So things like encouragement and education, amenities to support walking, biking, supporting the Regional Vision Zero action plan, prioritizing sidewalk gap closures based off of kind of activity centers or land use, those types of topics to be addressed. I mentioned a few times spring engagement, so coming up here, kind of the April, May, June timeframe for specific to the city of Sonoma, we will have a pop-up event where community members can provide input on the draft projects and priorities, as well as a community meeting. So we are working with staff to organize those. And then countywide, there will be an online digital engagement, kind of similar to what we did in round one, but instead in this round two, it'll be focused on an ability for the broader community to see draft projects and provide comments on those. And again, kind of coming up as part of that implementation, you've seen us start to talk about priorities after this next round of engagement. We'll be finalizing those, and then as part of the plan, identifying what are those potential funding opportunities to support implementation. And then moving this summer into putting the active transportation plan together. So at a kind of countywide level, the plan generally will be organized into a few different volumes. So kind of volume one being the countywide regional look. Volume two is where we'll see the chapters for local active transportation plans. And so for City of Sonoma, the plan will be organized into an introduction, kind of an existing community profile and what walking and biking and rolling looks like today, summary of the stakeholder engagement, presenting the vision and goals, and then getting into really the core of it being the what are the infrastructure improvements and then the policies and practices to go along with that. And then that implementation information, which would be things like the prioritization and funding and cost estimates. Our next milestone update to you all will be back in October, and that would be with at the time where we're also planning to be circulating the public draft plan for review. All right, that is the entirety of our presentation.
Thank you very much. Questions?
Can we make note that Project 7 really has no support?
Okay.
And I would like to see a more comprehensive look at this as how we connect with the county lines and what's happening on the border of the city, going out to the springs, going out to the east. I'd really, looking at it in just this defined city piece, I feel like we're missing some tangents that are coming in. So if we could see it at the next presentation and the county connections there, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Matt.
We talk about the 3-tier prioritization, and I'm looking at the prioritization criteria slide. Are the criteria listed in any sort of order?
The criteria are all treated equally, so they are not listed in any sort of priority order themselves.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a comment or two. I want to talk about flash beacons. We've recently had some flash beacons installed on Broadway. They're an improvement over what really was a quite dangerous situation of just a striped crosswalk. However, I walk across these Broadway crossings probably 10 times a week in either directions. And I've been evaluating the effectiveness of the flash beacons during the day. I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that at night they are probably very effective. But I must tell you that my evaluation of their effectiveness during the day is not all that favorable. I have pushed it, looked both ways, started to make my way across the intersection, and had cars just blast right past me, as if the beacons weren't even there, as if I weren't even there. And Broadway, in my opinion, continues to be a very dangerous situation, and I think someone will be killed. I came a couple feet close to being killed last week. And that's, I'm careful. I flag down the cars if I see them not stopping. I wave my hands. I make sure they stop before I move into the lane of traffic. I don't look at my phone when I cross the street. I'm very careful, but it continues to be dangerous. And as much as I appreciate the installation of the beacons, I think once again, this edge of when a safety device creates a false sense of confidence is a subject worth considering. I think these beacons in some cases are creating a false sense of confidence. And I don't know what ultimately the issue is, which brings me to my next comment or question, which is, for better or worse, this community and other communities, including the Springs, are basically have the State Highway 12 running right through the middle of them. And Caltrans is, to my experience, a world of its own. It operates on its own timetables. It has its own programmatic approach to things. It has its own priorities. Getting sidewalks in the Springs, where there was funding available through the existing redevelopment agency funding that existed at that time, took 20 years for Caltrans to be willing to put in sidewalks. That's an inordinately long period of time. So what are you able to do in this active transportation plan when you're working in communities where the actual commercial or other core elements of the city are bisected by Caltrans's control? How effective can you be? And do you have, in fact, any role in Caltrans's mind for what you want to do?
Well, I can tell you, I spend a lot of time talking with them about our ideas and our plans. I see Dana from SCTA turned on her camera. I'll provide an initial response and let Dana weigh in further. You're right, Caltrans does have their own kind of project development processes and maintenance and rehabilitation, pavement rehabilitation programs and things that have to be navigated to make improvements on the roadways that they own. But I think is most important for communities is to still include Caltrans facilities in planning documents, whether it's an active transportation plan or safety plan, and still articulate from their perspective, from the local community perspective, what are the improvements needed, what are the desired kind of improvements that are going to be most beneficial to the community. Because you need to have it in a plan to be able to start a meaningful conversation with Caltrans about it. And there are opportunities that come up when communities, have projects identified on Caltrans roadways where Caltrans will have a pavement rehabilitation project that comes up, or it might come to a point where you choose in partnership with another agency to initiate changes on a Caltrans facility, but kind of it needs to first be captured through a community process. And I think the kind of active transportation plan is one tool to start that process. Dana?
Yeah, thank you, Erin, and Fellow Commission. I'm Dana Trey from the Sonoma County Transportation Authority. I just wanted to note that Caltrans District 4 is actually in the process of updating their bicycle plan, and they're very aware that we are in the process of updating the plans in Sonoma County, and will be coordinating closely with us for our draft project list. There is a survey going out for the Caltrans plan in May, and we intend to coordinate with them and see where there's opportunities to bring that survey to our outreach events that we're planning this spring as well. So yes, I what Erin said is absolutely important to capture any desired changes on the Caltrans facilities within this plan. And we'll be working with Caltrans to incorporate those priorities into the Caltrans plan as well.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments or questions at this time? No? Well, I want to thank you for your time and the work you're doing. I think it's all very interesting. It's kind of exciting. And I look forward to the next phase of it and reviewing the projects that actually come up that we can pursue and that you will pursue. And I'm interested to see how readily available the funding is going to be on all of this. But hopefully that will happen too. So with that, thank you very much. And we look forward to meeting with you again in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, I need to take a 5-minute break. We will bring our meeting back to order. The last item on our agenda, or second to last, is the discussion on the parking ad hoc committee recommendations. That committee, for the record, was made up of Mr. Willers, Mr. WIRICK, and myself, Mr. Barnett. I'm going to let Mr. Willers make the presentation on the recommendations, unless, Jennifer, you've got some preliminary comments you'd like to make? Nope. Okay, Mr. Willers.
All right. For those of you who weren't on the ad hoc committee, all two of you, let's see. Our primary focus was to review the current parking standards, find areas where they needed to be cleaned up, and make recommendations for how to go about doing that, as well as maybe provide some reworking of, in this case, dimensional standards. And so, that comes about by our parking standards haven't been updated since 2015, and we have recently adopted the city's climate action plan. So asphalt and parking and the area that it takes up in our community is one of the largest things. It's usually about 50% of any development project. And so it represents a huge use of land within our community. And it also is one of the largest carbon footprint elements of development. Not only the cars that park on it, but the asphalt and the infrastructure that it takes to put it in place. And then now under new state laws in relationship to the environment, more infrastructure is required to clean and collect the water that runs off of it. So what we've done, I passed out a little sheet here. I call it Asphalt Fun Facts, but it's a way of getting your head around what a square foot of asphalt actually does environmentally. A square foot of asphalt in our community roughly runs off about 17 gallons of water, and it creates approximately 110 pounds of of CO2 equivalent, what's called CO2 equivalent. So putting down a square foot of asphalt creates about 110 pounds of carbon. A single tree in a year will offset about 46 pounds of carbon. So that's essentially twice, that's 2 square or half a square foot of asphalt that tree can offset from a carbon standpoint. So, a basic fundamental of sustainability and impact mitigation is not to create the impact to begin with. Then you don't have to offset it. You don't have to mitigate it. And so in light of updating the parking standards, there are some things that are within the code that we came to the conclusion that should be either moved from other areas in the city's bureaucracy and put into the development code directly, and some things that should be actually taken out of the development code and simply referenced to state code, state law that currently exist, because those things change. And as a summary in terms of the parking size, what the ad hoc committee came to the conclusion of is based on a variety of reviewing other jurisdictions, as well as what state law has essentially codified as full-size parking dimensions. We're making the recommendation that our minimum full-size parking space be codified at 9 feet by 18 feet. And accessible parking space is 9 feet by 18 feet by state law. An EV parking space under state law is 9 feet by 18 feet. Our code currently has a table that varies between commercial retail parking at 9 by 18, or 9 by 20 actually, residential at 10 by 20, industrial at 9.5 by 20. It has varying dimensions of parking spaces for varying uses, where the car that's parking there really isn't changing dimension at all. It's just simply, thought of as a, but as you can see, every square foot of asphalt that we put on the ground, we have to somehow mitigate the impacts of that. And the impacts are not just simply environmental, the impacts are the use of land. When we put an additional square foot of land down, we're not only increasing the load of water that has to be collected on site now, filtered, and then put into the streamway, but we've also reduced the amount of land that can be used for other purposes, landscaping, housing, those kinds of things. And so in that big bubble of review, I'll go through the list that we passed out and concentrate on the recommendations that we made rather than the entire list. We reviewed the current parking standards. It's interesting that our parking standards in the development code are the dimensional standards are actually contained in a document that isn't within the development code. And so it's cited that you go and find that when you're in the development code trying to develop a project. Unfortunately, that document, because it's not an integrated document, doesn't match the language that we have. It reiterates language that we have in the development code, but it hasn't updated that language. So we have two separate documents currently, one saying one thing, the other saying another. And it does that also, it has some conflict within even state law in terms of accessible parking spaces and citing certain sections. What happens with the California Building Code is that it is revised essentially every 3 years, not the whole document, but elements of it. And section numbers change because of added sections and added section numbers. And unless the city is constantly making those revisions to make sure that those sections are cited properly, it creates a conflict between what our documents state or refer to and what the state law sectionizing is. So one of our primary recommendations is that if it's a state law, if it's a state requirement, that we simply refer to it as a state requirement and that we're required to follow it. And then the example is accessibility and now EV charging spaces. I fully expect in the next code cycle that EV charging spaces will be every parking space. And so if that's going to change, there's no reason why we should say how many EV parking spaces, because the state tells you how many EV parking spaces you can have. So we can simply refer to that state requirement. That's how we do our work as an architect. That's how I do my work. I take the code requirements that kind of filter down from the state and then to the local. And our documents should be clear and simple to use in that way and not reiterate a state code. And certainly not include it in our development code so that when it changes there, we have to try to find an update in those big circles. And so that's one of the primary recommendations that we came up with. The second recommendation under parking standards is to set a minimum parking stall dimension, like I said. At a 90-degree parking stall would be 9 by 18. That would be a minimum size. Jennifer had a question about providing 4 compact spaces, and I think that that's a valuable comment. I think that we could come up with also a minimum compact. Currently, we have a 30% threshold for compact spaces that are allowed within parking lots. The idea behind providing a minimum parking size is people are allowed to make them bigger if they want to, but that it takes all the kind of variation between uses out of the development code. It's just a starting point. Many of the jurisdictions that surround us operate the same way. In their development code, they state a minimum parking stall size, and that's it, and that covers every use. And then if we wanted to include a minimum compact size, I believe what Petaluma does actually is they state their minimum parking size as 8 by 16, which is a compact space, and then you go from there. So, I don't think we want to do that. I think that, but we could possibly use that 8 by 18 or 8 by 16 as a compact space, as a minimum dimension for a compact space, and still allow the 30% threshold. I think that's perfectly fine. Again, accessible spaces would be a reference to California 11A and 11B, which is California Building Code. That's accessibility. That's the whole accessibility code wrapped up. The EV spaces fall out of Cal Green, out of the California Building Code, the Cal Green element. Those requirements will change as we become more electrified. And then another element of parking spaces is the backup dimension that's required. Currently, our backup dimension, our aisle backup area is 27 feet. It's a comfortable dimension to back up in if you have a big car. It's not a required dimension. The access to most development that is a required aisle width for most development is 20 feet because of fire safe standards. But backup spaces based on a 90-degree, that 24 feet is adequate. It requires you to think about backing up and not, just do it. But it also will save, in a 9-foot space, it's going to save 27 square feet of asphalt every time we make a parking bay. And so those 27 feet add up fast in terms of their potential impact as it relates to our climate action plan and reducing our greenhouse gas, contribution. So that's the primary focus for reducing the parking dimensions, is that they're functional. The state has reviewed them. The state believes that they're functional. The average parking space throughout all jurisdictions in California is 9 by 18. That's the average one that falls out all the time. So it's a reasonable one to pursue. And 24 feet is basically where everything bounces around. It's 24 to 27, 25. It just bounces around it. But, Sacramento is 8 by 18 is their minimum parking size, and their backup space is 22 feet. That's their minimum backup space. So we are creating functional parking lots, but we're not overdoing it in terms of putting asphalt on the ground. And let's see, I'll keep going. In the parking, in the list of things that we were going to analyze, the bold in our list, the parking standards now, parking exceptions, we were recommending that, the minimum parking space would, having a single minimum parking space would actually eliminate the requirement for an exception to parking, because we would have a minimum standard rather than a standard that kind of bounces around. But I believe that the exception category would we still maintain the exception category for compact? Because that's really where it applies to parking standards. Or would we just simply make it a 30%? That's it. That's it.
It could be the 30%, that's it, or in certain instances, the reason why that I had recommended maintaining the compact is because, as we know, like, for example, the safe parking lot, your compact is usually where your landscape, which you'll get to part of our discussion on that one, but those ideas of, if we have these reduced areas, it allows for still having a parking space, but it may not meet our standard just because there are things in the way.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess in discussing this, the recommendation would to maintain the exception category in our parking standards. That falls out of general plan exceptions in the development code. So, and those limitations are, like I say, are 30% of the code requirement. So if you could only have, you know, if you wanted to have 13 parking spaces, but you could only have 10, that's within the category of the 30%, you could ask for that exception to increase your compact spaces to 13. That would be allowed under the, you know, under the exception rules. But we would be setting minimum standards for parking dimensions, and so I don't see that parking dimensions would be an exception. We wouldn't we wouldn't be allowing exceptions to smaller spaces from the minimum. It would just be count, basically.
Okay,
Well,
so now I
except for
understand
in
your
the-
question. Now I understand.
Yeah.
So the compact is the exception. The allowance of a compact would be the exception. I would say I agree with your recommendation in the sense of getting rid of exceptions as a whole so that you don't increase the number of compact spaces within a development.
Good.
That's,
Okay.
so
that's-
that makes sense.
That's
Yeah.
good okay. So hopefully, I'm trying to do this quickly so that, because it's one of those technical things, but at the same time, I want to have clarity too, and whatever recommendation we're going to make, you know, we're going to make it to Jennifer, to staff, and they're going to have to understand what we're talking about. So number of spaces would still be an exception overall.
I think that's up to the commission. We can bring that. Right now, there are other ways in which we can talk about parking numbers, but I think we've kind of talked about that a lot, and I think that's what part of your recommendation
Yeah, it
is,
is,
kind of
yeah.
just leave that alone for right now.
Okay. So, so currently, you know, we're able to ask for exception in terms of number of spaces based on the specifics of a project up to 30% of the required number of spaces. So we're recommending that remain in place, because there are circumstances where numbers, even though we've done a good job, we modified table 4.4, which is the number of cars required, or number of parking spaces required per use. We've actually modified that and in general lowered the number of parking spaces that are required throughout the city. And then also in the development code is a section called in lieu fund, where a developer may pay into an in lieu parking program to not have to produce parking spaces, or for parking spaces that it chooses, and maybe that ties into exception, parking spaces that are exceptioned. The difficulty is that is a city council program to establish, and it hasn't been established yet. So it's in the code currently that there's an in lieu opportunity, but there's no program to put that money into. And we can't collect fees unless we have a place to put them. So that's an action item I believe that we should ask the city council to do. It's work, but it's not that much work, and the plaza parking program is probably going to be looking at that anyway. So if we can, you know, if we can integrate those things into this and complete an element of the development code that is allowed but by default can't be used, we're making progress. The minimum parking standards for driveways and turnaround backup areas, those things are established recently again in 2023 when we integrated the fire safe standards, the county fire safe standards, into our city fire safe standards. So that work's already been done. That, you know, that's a good thing. There are some minor cleanups in it in terms of recommendations of eliminating a reference to current city standards, that kind of thing, where, because we would be integrating the city standards into the development code rather than as a separate document. Under minimum parking space dimensions, this is a reworking of a table, and this is the table that we came up with based on the existing table. Backup spaces typically change based on the orientation of the car. If a car is perpendicular and backing out, you usually need a little bit more backup space because the car is trying to get out of a space and make a turn. When a parking space is angled, it doesn't require as much backup space. The ad hoc committee formed this table, but at the same time, we would expect that the W-Trans would review this, or a traffic engineer would review this. They already did that work a little bit ago when they were requested to come up with new dimensional standards. Parking lot landscape standards are still in the parking standards section. Currently, we have two parking standards. One is for one tree for every space, every 10 spaces. One is for one tree every 30 lineal feet of landscaped area. And those are literally separated by about a paragraph. I think they vary because of use, but it's still a parking lot. And it still needs, and especially in context of the climate action plan, it still needs to be shaded and mitigated from its heat generation. And so what we're recommending is to establish a tree canopy cover requirement, much like the city of Sacramento does. What the city of Sacramento does is they actually have an integrated code that is the making of parking lots and the shading of parking lots. That's one element of the code. And what they do, rather than specifying how many trees per foot or how many trees per space, they basically require that 50% of the asphalt be shaded. And there's a list of trees that you can choose, and there's a shading allotment that's allowed to take credit for if you plant those trees at a certain frequency. And that's how that's how staff is able to review it, because it's codified, that the planting plan for trees and parking lots will actually shade it 50%. It's an agreed upon method. And it's a very well, having read the document, it's a very well thought out document, in my opinion. It attempts to integrate the space required for landscaping and parking places, the space required for making happy trees, so to speak, and the new requirements for water runoff and collection, and tries to integrate those things together. And in that same realm, with the advent of EV charging, there's another space requirement at a parking space. We have an item now that has to go at the end of that parking stall. It has to be placed in a certain way so that you don't run it over, and that you can still plug it in, and that it has a landing pad in front of it. And so those dimensional requirements outside of the parking bay are actually increasing as well, because we need to make happy trees, we want to make landscaped areas, and we need to collect water, and we need to provide for EV parking spaces. And so an attempt to try to bring all of those things together could find some kind of symbiotic relationship. There is a relationship between what a tree needs in terms of a tree well, that 6 foot dimension where it's a really happy tree, and the placement of the EV charger, and its relationship to a sidewalk and the pad that you need from an accessibility standpoint. When you work all those dimensions out, it creates a 6 foot deep bay that can be utilized for all of those things, for landscaping, trees, EV charging, and accessibility. And so hopefully those things will come together as we work through this. Solar, and then the next item, solar requirements are going to be largely mandated and governed by the state of California. And so from our perspective in making recommendations relative to parking, we didn't think that there was any action required on that part. We may want to, in the future, if I just don't, we may want in the future, if solar collectors over parking as parking structures become an element that need to be somehow controlled, which is it's really difficult to do because the state basically says you have the right to put a solar collector on a piece of property, and you're now mandated to do it. So it's going to find its way of integrating. It's either going to be on a rooftop or it's going to be as a carport structure, and the space requirements for it and for the car are going to govern themselves. And the same holds true for electric vehicle charging stations. The state essentially is controlling how many, where they're going to go, and how they dimensionally have to fit into a parking space. So we didn't feel that needed to enter into our development code. It's essentially state mandated through Cal Green. Loading requirements, I believe we've already addressed that in terms of when we went through the last update with the fire safe standards. We cleaned that requirement up, and in terms of the number and quantity based on use, we cleaned that up in the general context when we changed the section that it included 4.4. Bicycle circulation safety, electric scooter, we've been talking about that all night long. We also did that in our use. We in terms of when we talked about how many cars to park, we also talked about how many bikes to park. And we came to the agreement that the accommodation of the bike, as long as it was shown to be adequate and feasible, could be brought forward by the project advocate of how they were going to solve that problem of providing the bicycle parking. Bicycle circulation, I don't think really fits into parking standards. We're going to develop a circulation element. And then, electric scooters, I don't know how much of a problem. We don't have the urban problem that San Francisco has with them, or Oakland. And so I don't think we need to begin making up code requirements until maybe there is a problem. I don't think there's going to be. I think our community is not a large enough.
We're too old.
It's not so much too old. I don't think we have the population to make it a feasible business here. Maybe someday. So that was the fallout from the ad hoc committee's recommendations. And in our list, you have our recommendations, and I'm simply going to follow up again in terms of reducing the amount of asphalt. 17 gallons of water per square foot, that now has to go into a ditch, essentially. It has to go into what's called, euphemistically called a bioswale. It's essentially a ditch. To capture that water, maintain it on site, treat it by its percolation, and slow it into the waterway, into the storm drain system of the city. But every square foot of asphalt also contains the petrochemical that have come off of the car, the dust that has come out of the environment, and other contaminants that are just in the environment. So anytime we create runoff on that asphalt, we also introduce all of those things into the waterway, because they will essentially build up in that bioswale and eventually enter our storm system. And we all know heat island impacts from asphalt. Asphalt is a 90% absorbing material in terms of the sun's energy because of its dark surface characteristics. And in our basic environment has the ability in urban environments to raise our daytime temperatures by as much as 9 degrees and nighttime temperatures by as much as 5. And so the more asphalt we put in place, the more we approach those numbers even in a community such as ours. So.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Willard. Are there any questions? No? As you can all see, this.
That is amazing. Can I just say, that was a really thorough overview of the impact of the asphalt. We didn't get into possible other surfaces besides asphalt, which I know always comes into driveways and parking areas, et cetera, but I just want to compliment that. That was really quite useful.
Okay, well, so in terms of passing these on as our recommendations to the council, do we need to vote on this? Do we need a motion?
You don't need a motion, just consensus on
Okay.
direction to move forward as recommended.
Anyone object to our passing on our recommendations to the council?
Looks good.
Okay, we might have to have Mr. Willers make the presentation to the council.
Well,
only get
we still need to make the actual ordinance changes and bring them back to you,
Yes.
and then we will go to council.
Yeah,
But
okay.
yes, we
All
can
right.
we can have Bill share as well.
Okay, so this brings us to the last item on our agenda, which is a discussion about modifications to our regular meeting dates in June, August, and September.
Okay, so this is in regards to that's going to be performing right here out that door on our Thursdays. So on June 20th and August 15th and September 19th, they will be having their production. So those are the meetings that we will be canceling. So we need to come up with other meeting dates. So I have looked at the calendars of what's available for this room. The dates I am currently proposing are June 18th, which is a Tuesday of the same week as our normally held meeting. August 22nd, which would be the following week on a Thursday after our normally held meeting. And then the 22nd. July is fine. It doesn't interrupt our July meeting date. And then September, again, going to the Tuesday before our normal meeting date on the 17th. So I'm just trying to make sure that we have enough time for everyone to plan their summer vacations and other things. You know, for those that have children or grandchildren that go on vacations, I don't know.
Or those without them that go on vacation.
I was going to say vacation.
Or me going on vacation.
Anyone have a problem? No?
Might
Is-
be possible conflict with September. I don't know that.
I'll be gone in August, but I'm gone for a couple weeks.
You on vacation?
I'm going to Ireland.
That's a vacation.
Woohoo! So I'll send these dates out around, and as long as we have a quorum, I'll just keep those as our
Okay,
dates.
these dates look fine.
All right.
All right, do we have at this point then any comments from our planning development director?
Yes, I do. So I did want to add another tickler. So we are finishing up the review of the existing conditions on our general plan right now, and then they'll start the also the document around the community engagement findings. We are looking to present this to a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and City Council, and right now that date is tentatively on May 1st before the normally held City Council meeting. So I will send that also out in an email just to make sure that we don't have any major conflicts. So that's in another month and a little bit for that. I also do want to, anybody listening, let people know that our building department is not closed. It is in fact open, and that we have lovely staff at our city that are able and willing to help answer any questions. And we are in the process of recruiting for a building official. And in the meantime, we have hired a contract interim building official and as extended that contract to include additional building permit review services, so plan review services, and additional inspection services at this time. So no delay in services. We'd actually probably are going to see an increase in return of building permit plan checks because the number of individuals that would be available through this contract. And we miss Joe. His last day was today physically in the office, but it will be last day officially next week. And we got to see Wayne as well this week at Joe's going away lunch. So, with 4Leaf is who we're using right now. And that contract was extended at City Council to incorporate the additional costs last night at City Council. And that contract is just through the end of this fiscal year. So the idea is that we would hire a building official and then that they would grow their team. All right, that's it.
That's it. All right, thank you. Now, any commissioner comments? Question, yes, go ahead.
Do we have any projects on the radar that are coming forward to the Planning Commission? Any development projects?
There will be some development projects. The Montaldo project has resubmitted, so it's under review right now.
What one is that?
The Montaldo, it came through for a study session in 2022, I think. And then there'll be a project on First Street East, First Street East, sorry.
Okay, I have a comment. One of the, now that the single parking standard ad hoc has completed its work, there might be some value in creating a new ad hoc that has to do with lighting. And basically, it would be an issue of the style, nature, and level of illumination, its impact on, what is it called, the dark skies movement, so that the night experience doesn't become one that's dominated by artificial lighting, but you can actually see the sky and the stars and the rest. So just think about it, and at our next meeting we can decide if we want to do that. If you have one of the other things that we can do between now and the next meeting is to go back through the project priorities that we established for ourselves and see what among those things people may have an interest in working on separately. I think this, while the other ad hocs we've established have yet to come forward with the completion of their tasks.
You look this way.
Well, I'm just looking around. I want to include everybody.
We've made a date.
They will do their work, so we can look at what we want to do further afield. Ironically, the housing ad hoc kind of lines up with one of the city council goals for this year, as well as the opportunity to sync it with our housing element. I was a little confused by the councils deciding to put housing on their goal list because that's what the housing element is. But nonetheless, what do I know? I'm an ex-city councilman. So that work will get done, and we should look at the other areas that we want to explore. So that's all I had. Anyone else have any comments? No? Well, with that, then, I would like a motion to adjourn. So moved. We are adjourned.